I stood in the living room of my childhood home, clutching the deed to 47 Maple Avenue in my trembling hands. Outside, spring rain pattered against the windows, reflecting the tears that threatened to spill from my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of a cold, clarifying rage that had been building for decades. What do you mean the wedding is off? My mother, Margaret, stood frozen by the fireplace, her carefully maintained face twisted in disbelief. Even at 65, she refused to let a wrinkle show, though shock was doing what age hadn't managed. I'm not saying the wedding is off, Mom, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm saying it won't be happening here. But this is Claire's home. She protested, her manicured hand fluttering to her throat, a dramatic gesture she'd perfected over the years. No, I said, placing the property deed on the coffee table. This is my home, has been since 2008, when Dad was about to lose it. The look on my mother's face shifted from confusion to horror as realization dawned. Behind her, my father Robert sank into his armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. My sister Claire stared at the document, her perfect features contorting as her carefully constructed world began to crumble. You're lying, Claire whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. County records don't lie, Claire. I met her eyes with a steadiness I'd spent my whole life trying to find. Maybe it's time none of us did anymore. How had we reached this point? The Richardson family, with our marble floors and crystal chandeliers, our carefully curated image of success and harmony, now facing a truth we'd all spent years avoiding. The truth that I, Sarah Richardson, the daughter they had always overlooked, actually owned the very ground they stood on. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 42 years of seeking their approval, I had finally found my voice. And it had taken losing almost everything, including my self-respect, to find it. Flashback, 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks earlier, I had stood in this same living room with a different kind of tension twisting my stomach. My mother's voice echoed off the high ceilings as she fussed over my clothes. Sarah, darling, you could have at least worn the dress I sent you, she said, adjusting my blazer with disapproving fingers. This is your father's 60th anniversary party, not a business meeting. I stepped away from her touch, a reflexive movement born from years of similar criticisms. I'm comfortable like this, Mom. The house buzzed with the typical Richardson family gathering energy, fake laughs, clinking glasses, and the constant undercurrent of judgment. I'd helped set up earlier, arranging flowers in the grand entrance and positioning appetizer tables throughout the living room, not because anyone asked me to, but because some part of me still craved their approval. At 42, I was a successful real estate consultant with my own firm. I'd built a life that by all external measures was enviable. Yet standing in my parents' home, the home I'd secretly rescued from foreclosure during the 2008 financial crisis, I felt like I was shrinking back to the insecure girl I'd once been, constantly seeking validation from a family that seemed constitutionally incapable of giving it. Oh my God, is that Michael? My mother's eyes lit up as she spotted him entering through the front door. My stomach dropped. Michael, my ex, the man who disappeared from my life 3 years ago with nothing but a text message and a box of my things left on my doorstep. He looked exactly the same. Tall, perfectly styled dark hair, that disarming smile that had once made my knees weak. Mrs. Richardson, he embraced my mother like he'd never broken her daughter's heart. The house looks amazing, doesn't it? We just had the floors redone, she beamed, conveniently forgetting who had paid for those floors. I turned to escape to the kitchen, but Claire's voice rang out above the party chatter. Everyone, could I have your attention, please? The room fell silent. Claire stood on the bottom step of the grand staircase, radiant in her red designer dress at 36. Michael moved to stand beside her, and my blood ran cold. First, I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Mom and Dad's anniversary, Claire started, her voice dripping with rehearsed sweetness. But Michael and I have an announcement of our own to make. No, 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 I thought. We're engaged. The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. My father rushed forward to shake Michael's hand. My mother burst into tears of joy. I stood frozen, gripping my champagne glass so tight I thought it might shatter. Isn't it wonderful? My mother grabbed my arm. Your sister getting married. and to Michael of all people. We always loved him. Yeah, I managed. Wonderful. Claire floated through the crowd, showing off her enormous diamond ring. When she reached me, her smile turned razor sharp. What do you think, big sister? He picked it out himself. Bigger than the one he was going to give you, isn't it? I met her eyes, searching for the little sister I'd once read bedtime stories to, the girl who'd come to me crying when she scraped her knees. Instead, I found a stranger who'd spent decades competing with me, a competition I hadn't even known we were having. How long? I asked quietly. How long were you seeing him before we broke up? She laughed, high and false. Oh, Sarah, always so paranoid. Michael and I only got together 6 months after you two ended things. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Looks like I win again, just like always. I watched her glide away, back to our beaming parents and her adoring fiancé. My chest felt tight, but not from heartbreak. No, this was different. This was rage, cold and clarifying. Sarah? It was Julia, my best friend, touching my arm gently. You okay? I need some air. Outside the decision. The night air was cool against my burning cheeks as I walked to my car, my heels clicking against the driveway my money had repaid. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, staring at the house that contained my family, if they could still be called that. Memories flooded back. My graduation day when my mother had criticized my hair instead of congratulating me on being valedictorian. My first major real estate deal when my father had asked if my boss would be upset that I was going out on my own. Claire taking credit for my ideas since we were children, and more recently, Michael, who I genuinely loved, leaving without a proper goodbye. The pattern was suddenly clear, illuminated by Claire's engagement like lightning exposing a landscape at night. I'd spent my entire life seeking approval from people who were constitutionally incapable of giving it. I opened the glove compartment and pulled out the sealed manila envelope I'd been carrying around for months, just waiting for the right moment. Inside was the property deed to 47 Maple Avenue, this very house, the house my parents had nearly lost during the financial crisis, the house I'd secretly bought to save them from foreclosure. I still remember that day in 2008 with perfect clarity. My father sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands, confessing that they were 3 months behind on mortgage payments. My mother, for once without makeup, her face naked with fear. Claire, 20, dramatically sobbing about having to leave her childhood home. I can help, I'd offered, having just closed my first major real estate deal. Oh, sweetie, this is grown-up business, my mother had said, patting my hand like I was still a child instead of a successful 23-year-old woman. I did help anyway. I bought their house outright, working with my lawyer Richard to structure the deal. They'd been so relieved, so quick to move on once the crisis had passed, that they'd never even read the paperwork. They'd assumed their names would be on the deed because, of course, what daughter would buy her parents' house and put only her name on the title? A daughter who'd spent her life being overlooked, perhaps. A daughter who, even in that moment of rescue, had been diminished. My phone buzzed, a text from Richard. Ready when you are. I smiled, tucking the envelope under my arm. Claire wanted to have her perfect wedding in my house? Fine. But first, she'd learn what it felt like to lose something she thought was hers. Game on, little sister, I whispered, walking back toward the party. Game on. At Richard's office the following day. You should have seen their faces when Claire announced the engagement, I said, pacing across Richard's office. Like they'd completely forgotten Michael was ever with me. Richard looked up from the stack of legal documents on his mahogany desk. At 55, he'd been my lawyer for over 20 years, witnessing both my professional rise and personal disappointments. The silver at his temples added to his air of dignified competence. Are you sure you want to do this, Sarah? There's no going back once we serve these notices. I stopped at the window, watching traffic crawl by 15 stories below. The memory of that day in 2008 flooded back. My father's crumpled face as he admitted they were 3 months behind on mortgage payments, my mother's mascara-stained cheeks, Claire's theatrical sobs about having to leave her childhood home. Do you remember what they said when I offered to help? I asked. Refresh my memory. My mother said, Oh, sweetie, this is grown-up business. I was 23, had just closed my first major real estate deal, and they still treated me like a child. I turned back to face him. Then I bought their house outright, and they never even read the paperwork because they assumed their names would be on the deed. He'd been there, after all, Richard finished, nodding. I watched you sign the papers making you the sole owner of 47 Maple Avenue. My phone buzzed, a text from Julia. Girl, Claire's already posting wedding venue pics of your house. Show me. I called her back, putting her on speaker. Instagram. She's calling it the Richardson family estate and talking about her perfect garden wedding next spring. Richard raised an eyebrow as I pulled up the posts. There was Claire posing in front of my rose garden, Michael's arm around her waist. The caption read, "Where it all began. Can't wait to say I do at my family home." The audacity, I muttered. Sarah, Julia's voice was gentle through the speaker. Are you doing this for justice or revenge? I stared at the photo. Does it matter? It matters to you. I know you. You've spent your whole life trying to prove your worth to them. Make sure this is about freeing yourself, not punishing them. The words hit me harder than I expected. Was this about justice, or was I still trapped in the same old pattern of seeking validation through new means? Richard slid a document across his desk. Speaking of the wedding, they've already filed for event permits, listed your father as the property owner, of course. Of course they did. I picked up the paper, scanning the details. They're planning for 300 guests in my house without asking me. That's fraud, Richard said simply. Can we use that? He nodded. Already drafted a cease and desist. But Sarah, there's something else you should see. He pulled up an email on his computer. Michael's been making inquiries about property rights, specifically about challenging old deed transfers. My stomach clenched. You think he knows? I think he's suspicious. The timing is interesting. Right after getting engaged to Claire, he starts digging into property law. My phone buzzed again, my mother this time. I let it go to voicemail. Play it, Julia said, still on speaker. I want to hear this. I hit play. Sarah darling, we're meeting with the wedding planner tomorrow at the house. I know you're busy with your little real estate thing, but do try to make it. Claire wants to discuss the renovation plans for the kitchen. The countertops simply won't do for the reception. I ended the message. My little real estate thing? That's rich, coming from someone living in a house I bought. Sarah, Julia's voice was firm. Promise me something. What? Promise you won't let this consume you. I've watched you spend years trying to prove yourself to them. Maybe it's time to just let go. I picked up the trespassing notices Richard had prepared. I am letting go. Of them, of their control, of every backhanded compliment and dismissive comment. By throwing them out of my house. Your home, Richard corrected gently. And yes, I continued. Sometimes karma needs a little push. Flashback childhood. My earliest memories are colored with Claire's presence. She was born when I was 6, and from the beginning, she was the family darling. When she was a baby, I'd make funny faces to hear her giggle. I'd read her stories at night, making up voices for each character. You're the best big sister, she'd say, her small hand holding mine as we'd fall asleep. When did it change? Maybe it was gradual, the way erosion slowly transforms a landscape. My mother had always been particular about appearances. A former beauty queen who married up into Boston society, Margaret Richardson measured her worth by her husband's social standing and her daughter's accomplishments, though not in the ways that mattered to me. Claire was naturally sociable, effortlessly charming in a way I never managed to be. While I buried myself in books and later in business plans, she collected friends and admirers like others collected stamps. My parents beamed at her social success, while my academic achievements earned barely a nod. You could try to be more like your sister, my mother would say when I preferred staying in to study rather than attending another meaningless social function. A woman needs more than brains to succeed in this world. By the time I was a teenager, the pattern was set. Claire could do no wrong. I could never quite do right. When I won a scholarship to study business, my father's first question was whether it was a full ride. When I graduated with honors, My mother's primary concern was whether my graduation gown would photograph well. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I believe, in their way, they did. But it was a conditional love, always slightly out of reach, always requiring just a little more effort, a little more conformity to their expectations. Perhaps that's why I pushed myself so hard in my career. Each success was another attempt to prove my worth, to finally earn the unconditional approval I craved. And perhaps that's why, when they nearly lost everything in 2008, I stepped in without hesitation, writing a check that represented most of my savings. The irony that they never even knew the full extent of what I'd done wasn't lost on me. They thought Dad had worked out some arrangement with the bank. He'd been too proud to tell them otherwise, and I'd been too accustomed to being overlooked to correct them. At the meeting. I arrived at the house early, before the wedding planner. Claire was already there, arranging flower samples on my dining room table like she owned the place. "You're late," she said without looking up. "Actually, I'm early." I set my coffee down. "We need to talk about Michael." That got her attention. She straightened, crossing her arms defensively. At 36, Claire still had the beauty that had always made her the center of attention, but now I could see the fine lines of worry around her eyes, the slight hardening of her expression that came with age and disappointment. "There's nothing to talk about. He chose me. Did he choose you, or did you choose him?" "Oh my God." She rolled her eyes. "Are you still bitter about that?" "It was 3 years ago." I pulled out a chair and sat down, suddenly tired of the games we'd been playing our entire lives. "Remember my high school graduation when you took credit for my valedictorian speech? What does that have to do with anything? Or that time you stole my prom dress and told Mom I was the one who ruined yours?" Claire's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. "Ancient history, is it? Because it seems like you're still playing the same games, taking what's mine and calling it a victory." I leaned forward. "Tell me something. Did you know about the house?" A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "What about it? Who owns it?" She waved dismissively. "Dad, obviously." "Why are you being weird?" The doorbell rang before I could respond. My mother burst in, followed by an elegant woman carrying a tablet. Margaret Richardson had aged well, her blonde hair expertly colored to hide any gray, her face subtly maintained by the best cosmetic surgeons in Boston. At 65, she still commanded attention when she entered a room, a skill she'd tried and failed to instill in me. "Sarah, you actually came." Mom's surprise was barely concealed. "And look, you're not wearing black for once." The wedding planner introduced herself as Marina and immediately began spreading magazines across my table. "Now, I've been thinking about the layout, the ceremony in the garden, cocktail hour on the terrace, and the reception flowing through the main floor. We'll need to update those awful kitchen counters," my mother interjected, "and that chandelier in the foyer. It's not quite right for photos." "The chandelier stays," I said quietly. "Don't be difficult, Sarah," Claire sighed. "This is my wedding in my family home." "Your family home?" I repeated, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Three heads turned to stare at me. "What did you say?" my mother asked. But before I could respond, the front door opened again. Diane, my godmother, walked in, her timing impeccable as always. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said, taking in the scene. Diane had been my mother's best friend in college, but unlike my mother, she'd built her life on substance rather than appearance. At 63, her silver hair was worn in a stylish bob, her face lined with the evidence of a life fully lived. She'd been more of a mother to me than my own in many ways, the one person who saw me clearly. "Sarah, could I borrow you for a moment?" In the kitchen, Diane poured herself a glass of water. "I saw the legal notices on Richard's desk yesterday. Are you here to talk me out of it?" "No," she said thoughtfully. "I'm here to remind you that karma works both ways, sweetheart. Make sure your actions come from justice, not hatred." From the dining room, I could hear Claire's voice rising. "And we'll need to clear out that ugly office upstairs for the bridal suite." "My office," I muttered. Diane touched my arm. "You were always the strong one, you know, even as a little girl." When Claire would break her toys, you'd give her yours just to keep the peace. Not anymore. No, she agreed. Not anymore. But strength isn't just about standing up for yourself, Sarah. It's about knowing why you're doing it. We returned to find my mother and Claire deep in renovation plans. Marina was sketching something on her tablet. Oh, good, my mother said. Sarah, we need you to clear out your things from the upstairs office by next week. The contractors are coming too. No, I said. Excuse me? No. My voice was quiet but firm. No contractors, no renovations, no wedding. The confrontation present, Claire snatched the property deed from the coffee table. Her face went pale as she scanned the document. This has to be fake. Check the county records, I said calmly. I've owned this house since 2008, when Dad was about to lose it to the bank. Remember when you all said I couldn't possibly understand grown-up business? My mother's hand flew to her throat. But Robert said, Dad never read the paperwork. None of you did. You just assumed. Marina cleared her throat awkwardly. Perhaps I should come back another time. No need, I said. There won't be a wedding here. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, another piece I'd paid to restore without acknowledgement. Claire's face twisted into something ugly. You can't do this to me, she suddenly shouted. Like you couldn't keep Michael. Like you couldn't handle being less loved, less wanted. You've always been jealous, she spat. Because I'm getting everything you wanted. I looked at my sister, really looked at her perhaps for the first time in years. Behind the perfect makeup and designer clothes, I saw something unexpected. Fear. Fear and a desperate need for validation that mirrored my own with unsettling accuracy. No, Claire, I said softly. I'm getting what I wanted, the truth. And the truth is, this house is mine. The truth is, you've been competing with me your entire life for a prize I never even knew we were fighting for. Sarah, my mother pleaded, be reasonable. This is your sister's special day. From the doorway, Diane spoke up. I believe Sarah is being perfectly reasonable. It's her house, after all. My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. I never meant for it to be like this. His voice sounded old, defeated. When you bought the house, I was going to tell them, but then. Time passed. 17 years passed, Dad, I said, not unkindly. 17 years of letting them think you saved the family, while I stood in the background, invisible as always. You bought our house? My mother's voice was barely a whisper, the implications slowly dawning on her. When you were 3 months behind on the mortgage. When the bank was about to foreclose. When Dad's investments had failed. I looked at Claire. When your college tuition was still being paid despite there being no money to pay it. Claire sank into a chair, the property deed still clutched in her hand. I never knew, she whispered. All these years. No one did, I said. That was the problem. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Your father was in the records office this morning looking up the deed. I showed the message to my father. Interesting timing, Dad. Right after the engagement announcement. He had the grace to look ashamed. Michael. He might have mentioned something about legal options. Of course he did. I turned to Claire. Did you know your fiancé has been researching property law, specifically how to challenge old deed transfers? Claire's eyes widened. What? Michael has been looking into ways to contest my ownership of this house. I suspect he knew, or at least suspected, long before today. Claire's phone began to ring. Michael's name flashed on the screen. She stared at it, then silenced the call. I don't understand, my mother said, looking lost. If you own the house, why didn't you say something before? It was a question I'd asked myself many times. Because part of me was still that little girl desperate for your approval. Because I thought if I just did enough, gave enough, achieved enough, eventually you'd see me. Tears filled my mother's eyes, real tears, not the theatrical ones she'd perfected for social occasions. Sarah, we always saw you. No, Mom. You saw what you wanted to see. A daughter who didn't quite fit your mold. A backup plan in case Claire failed to fulfill your dreams. That's not true. But the protest lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my business? When was the last time you remembered I'm allergic to shellfish before ordering catering? When was the last time any of you treated me like I mattered as much as Claire? The silence that followed was answer enough. Claire looked up, her mascara smudged from unexpected tears. I always thought you had everything, she said quietly. You were so smart, so capable. Mom and Dad were always comparing me to you. Why can't you get grades like Sarah? Why can't you be responsible like your sister? I stared at her in disbelief. Are we talking about the same childhood? You never needed their approval like I did, Claire continued. You had your own path. Do you know how terrifying it is to have a sister who seems perfect? I took Michael because I wanted to prove I could have something you wanted, something you valued. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All these years, while I'd been striving for approval, Claire had been doing the same, each of us thinking the other was the favored one. My father cleared his throat. We never meant to pit you against each other. No, Diane said from the doorway. But you did. And now you all have a choice to make about what happens next. 3 months later, epilogue. The garden at 47 Maple Avenue was in full bloom, roses climbing trellises, hydrangeas exploding in blue and purple clouds. I sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was still strange to think of this place as truly mine, to embrace ownership not just of the property, but of my place in the world. After the confrontation, things had changed not miraculously, not completely, but significantly. Claire and Michael had broken up after she discovered he'd known about the house ownership all along and had pursued her partly for access to what he thought was family property. Her heartbreak had been real, but also clarifying. For the first time in our adult lives, we'd had honest conversations, painful but necessary. My parents had moved to a condo downtown, an adjustment my mother especially was still struggling with. My father had finally admitted to years of financial mismanagement and a pride that had prevented him from acknowledging my help. They were trying, in their way, to make amends, my mother less critical, my father more honest. We were all learning a new language of family, one word at a time. The sound of the garden gate opening pulled me from my thoughts. Claire walked up the path, carrying a bottle of wine. Sorry I'm late, she said, setting the bottle on the table. Client meeting ran over. After the breakup, she decided to go back to school, pursuing the marketing degree she'd abandoned years ago to follow a boyfriend. Now she was interning at an agency, starting over at 36 with a humility that would have been unimaginable months ago. It's fine, I said, pouring us each a glass. How's the new apartment? Small? Noisy? Mine. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. I never lived alone before, you know? Always with roommates or boyfriends, or back with mom and dad. It's scary, but good. I nodded, understanding completely. Independence usually is. I've been thinking, Claire said, her finger tracing the rim of her wine glass, about selling my car to pay for next semester's tuition. You love that car. I love not being dependent more. She looked up at me. I spent my whole life taking the easy way out, Sarah. Taking what I wanted without earning it. I don't want to be that person anymore. The admission touched me deeply. I could help, you know. With tuition. I know you could. But I need to do this myself. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I need to be more like my big sister. The words were a balm to old wounds, not fully healed but no longer festering. What about you? Claire asked. Are you really going to convert the East Wing into those apartments? I nodded. 3 units for transitional housing. Women getting back on their feet after divorce or domestic violence. It had been Julia's suggestion, a way to use my financial security and this too large house for something meaningful. The foundation should be up and running by fall. Mom still scandalized at the idea of those people living in her house, Claire said with a small laugh. But she'll come around. It's not her house, I reminded her gently. It's mine, and I get to decide what it means now. The Richardson House Women's Foundation would be my legacy, something built from the pain of the past, but looking toward a different future. Not perfect, not without complications, but authentic in a way our family had never managed to be. As the evening deepened around us, Claire and I talked about small things, her classes, my business, a movie we'd both seen. It wasn't the relationship of my childhood dreams, but it was real. And at 42, I'd finally learned that reality, with all its messiness and imperfection, was worth far more than the glossy illusions I'd chased for so long. The house stood solid behind us, no longer a symbol of what I'd lost or what I'd secretly held, but of what might still be built on foundations strong enough to weather any storm. The letter trembled in my hands as raindrops pelted against the bookstore windows. Outside, autumn was painting Maple Street in shades of amber and crimson, but inside second chapter, my sanctuary of bound paper and literary dreams, time stood perfectly still. Dearest Julia, I read aloud, though no one but the ghosts of Austin and Bronx could hear me. I know you're worried about your sister's attitude lately, but remember she was our backup plan. We only had her because the doctor said you might not be able to have children. You're our real miracle. The yellowed paper felt like acid against my fingertips. I discovered it when I was 13, tucked away in my mother's desk drawer while searching for a stapler. 29 years later, the words still burned as fresh as the day I first read them. I am Marion Gray, 47, former literature teacher turned bookstore owner, and tonight my parents would be standing in this very room, desperate for my help after decades of treating me like a shadow. My sister Catherine's latest financial disaster had finally caught up with them all. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their miracle child had become their greatest burden, while their backup plan was now their only hope. The clock struck 7 as I carefully refolded the letter and slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan. I ran my fingers along the spine of Wuthering Heights, drawing strength from Heathcliff's fierce determination. Tonight, there would be a reckoning. For what is done or learned by one class of women becomes, by virtue of their common womanhood, the property of all women, I whispered, quoting Elizabeth Blackwell. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet, my oldest friend and attorney. Ready for this? She'd written. I typed back. I've been ready for 30 years. Seen one unexpected visitors. The doorbell chimed softly at exactly 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in early September. I wasn't expecting anyone. The bookstore had closed at 6, and I'd been cataloging a new shipment of poetry collections. When I pulled open the heavy oak door, I almost laughed at the cosmic joke standing on my doorstep. My parents, Robert and Elizabeth Harrison, looking smaller and grayer than I remembered, wearing expressions I'd never seen on their faces before. Was that desperation? The last time I'd seen them was 5 years ago at Catherine's promotion party at her advertising agency. I hadn't been invited personally, but I saw the photos on Facebook, the same Facebook where they had proudly shared every single one of her accomplishments while my graduate school acceptance letter gathered dust in a drawer somewhere. Marian, honey, Elizabeth's voice cracked. Can we come in? I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe of my bookstore, the converted townhouse I'd purchased without a penny of their help, filled with the literature that had been my only true family. The scent of old books and fresh coffee lingered in the air. That depends, I said quietly. Are you lost? Robert cleared his throat, his once commanding professor's voice now trembling. Please, sweetheart, we need to talk. Sweetheart. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. That's new. Last time we spoke, you said my decision to teach literature instead of pursuing law was throwing away my potential. Behind them, rain began to fall more heavily, autumn leaves swirling in small eddies across the sidewalk. Despite everything, I couldn't leave them standing in the rain. Perhaps some small part of me, the part that still remembered being 5 years old and believing my father hung the moon, wanted to hear what they had to say. Come in, I said, stepping aside. I just put the kettle on. They followed me inside, moving cautiously through the bookstore as though afraid to disturb the carefully arranged displays. My parents looked out of place among the poetry collections and first editions, Robert, with his tweed jacket now hanging loosely on his frame, and Elizabeth, her once perfect posture now curved with age. Beautiful store, she managed, eyes darting around the room. Thank you. Turns out teaching literature to unappreciative teenagers for 15 years taught me a lot about perseverance. The barb landed. Robert flinched. I led them upstairs to my living quarters, a cozy space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a bay window overlooking the street. The contrast between their stiff discomfort and my quiet contentment gave me a satisfaction I hadn't anticipated. About your career choice, Robert started, perching awkwardly on my sofa. Oh, you mean when you refused to support my graduate studies in literature even though I had a full scholarship that only needed living expenses? When you drained my college fund to send Catherine to Harvard Business School instead? I kept my voice light, casual, running my finger along the spines of my beloved books. Water under the bridge. I mean, it's not like I had to work as a night clerk at that sketchy motel or take out loans I just finished paying off 3 years ago. We made mistakes, Elizabeth whispered, her hands twisting in her lap. Did you? Because I remember you being quite confident in your choices at the time. What was it you said, Dad? Catherine's education is an investment in the family's future, implying mine wasn't. The silence stretched between us like the unbridgeable gap it had always been. We're here because Robert's voice faltered. Because Catherine's perfect life isn't so perfect anymore. I finished for him. Yes, I heard about the divorce and the credit card debt and the fact that she's been borrowing from your retirement fund. Their shocked faces told me everything. They didn't expect me to know. They didn't expect the quiet bookworm to have resources or connections. How did you? Elizabeth started. I run a successful independent bookstore in a digital age, I interrupted, pouring myself tea but not offering them any. Information gathering is essential to survival. Just like I know you're facing foreclosure on the house where you prioritize Catherine while treating me like an inconvenient afterthought. Just then, the doorbell chimed again. Through the window, I could see a sleek car pulling away, a taxi, not the usual rideshare. I knew exactly who it was. Come in, I called out. Catherine burst through the door, her designer bag swinging wildly. Despite everything, she still managed to look polished, though the strain showed around her eyes. Mom? Dad? Why are you here? I told you I'd handle it. Handle what, exactly? I asked, though I already knew. The mess you made? The money you burned through? Or were you planning to manipulate them into selling their house to cover your mistakes again? You don't understand, Marion, Catherine snapped. Some of us had real careers to maintain, real responsibilities. Right, I said, the word sharp as a paper cut. Because teaching literature to underprivileged kids while you partied at Harvard was me being irresponsible? The words hung in the air between us. Decades of resentment crystallized into a single exchange. We're losing everything, Elizabeth interrupted, tears streaming down her face. The house, our savings. Marion, please, you're our only hope. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my simple wool cardigan, the one I'd bought myself like everything else in my life. That's funny, I said quietly. I remember saying those exact words to you 15 years ago when I was begging you not to take my graduate school money when I needed my parents. Remember what you said then? They didn't answer. They didn't have to. You said, you'll figure it out. And you know what? I did. I walked to my door and opened it. So here's what's going to happen. You're all going to leave right now. But tomorrow evening, I'm hosting a poetry reading here at the store. All of you will attend. And afterward, we'll talk terms. Terms? Robert asked, the academic in him temporarily overshadowing the desperate father. I smiled, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. Yes, terms. Because if you want my help, it's going to cost you. And I'm not talking about money. As they filed out, Elizabeth reached for my hand, but I stepped back. The rain had stopped, but puddles reflected the streetlights like tiny mirrors. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of myself, standing tall in the doorway, no longer the forgotten daughter, but a woman of substance and determination. 7 o'clock, I reminded them. Don't be late. Scene 2 strategic planning. The next morning, I woke before dawn, as was my habit. At 5 a.m., I sat by my window with a cup of Earl Grey and my worn copy of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, though I couldn't focus on the familiar words. Instead, I found myself remembering the summer before graduate school when I'd approached my parents for help. "We've already committed to Catherine's MBA," my father had said, not even looking up from his academic journal. "Your grandmother's fund has been reallocated. You have a partial scholarship. Make it work." That night, I cried until there were no tears left, then applied for a job at the 24-hour motel on the edge of town. The manager had liked my responsible face. I didn't tell him I was terrified every time a customer looked at me too long. The memory dissolved as my phone rang. It was Janet Foster, my oldest friend and now my attorney. "You actually did it," she said instead of hello. "You stood up to them." "I did," I confirmed, watching the sunrise paint my bookshelves gold. "They're coming to the poetry reading tonight." "And you're sure about this? Using your reading as the setting for your conditions?" I smiled, remembering how Janet had stood by me through college, how she'd raised her daughter alone while putting herself through law school. "Poetry has always been my strength, Janet. It seems fitting to use it as my shield now." An hour later, Janet arrived at the bookstore with a stack of legal documents and a bottle of wine. "For after," she explained, setting it aside. "David's coming at noon with the financial analysis." I nodded, grateful for my small circle of loyal friends. David Chen, my accountant and business partner, had helped me buy this place when everyone said an independent bookstore would fail within a year. 5 years later, second chapter was the literary heart of the community. "You're really going to make them sign all this?" Janet asked, reviewing the conditions I'd drafted. "Every single word," I said, watching the printer spit out page after page. "They want my help. These are my terms." "This is exquisite justice," Janet said, a smile playing at her lips. "But what if they refuse?" "Then they lose everything," I shrugged. Just like they were willing to let me lose everything. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Just spoke with the bank. Your parents' foreclosure is moving forward unless they come up with $175,000 by the end of the month. Also, confirmed for tonight. Bringing those first editions you wanted." "Perfect," I texted back. "You're still coming to the reading, right?" "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "Someone needs to keep you from reading Sylvia Plath and terrifying the regular customers." I laughed, but part of me knew he wasn't entirely joking. My selections for tonight's reading were carefully chosen weapons, each poem a reflection of familial betrayal and resilience. As I arranged chairs in the bookstore's main room, I found myself thinking about Catherine. My sister and I had never been close. How could we be, when every interaction was poisoned by our parents' obvious favoritism? But I remembered one moment, just one, when she had shown me kindness. I was 16, working on a poetry assignment, when Catherine, home from college for the weekend, had peeked over my shoulder. "That's actually good," she'd said, sounding surprised. "You should submit it to the literary magazine." For one brief moment, I'd felt seen. Then she'd added, "Too bad there's no money in poetry." And the moment had shattered. Now, as I placed a vase of autumn leaves on the podium, I wondered if there had ever been a chance for us to be real sisters, or if our parents' disparate treatment had made that impossible from the start. David arrived at noon with lunch and financial projections. "They're completely underwater," he confirmed, spreading spreadsheets across my counter. Catherine's divorce settlement drained what was left of their liquid assets, and her latest business venture took the rest. "Which was?" I asked, though I had my suspicions. "A luxury goods importing business," David said with a grimace. "It failed spectacularly when her supplier turned out to be selling counterfeits." "The legal fees alone." I nodded, unsurprised. Catherine had always valued appearance over substance. "In your parents' house?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Going to auction next week unless they can come up with the money," David confirmed. "Your father's pension won't cover their debts, and with the early retirement he took." "Because of his drinking," I added quietly. David raised an eyebrow. "You knew?" I suspected. The academic world isn't kind to professors who show up intoxicated to faculty meetings. I sighed, remembering how my mother had called me, her only contact in 5 years, to tell me he'd been forced to retire early. I'd sent a card. They hadn't acknowledged it. "Marian," David said gently. Are you sure you want to do this? You've built something beautiful here, bringing them back into your life. I looked around at my bookstore, at the carefully curated sections, the comfortable reading nooks, the children's corner where I held weekly story times. This was my world, created from the ashes of their rejection. I'm not bringing them back into my life, I said finally. I'm showing them the life I created without them. There's a difference. By 6 o'clock, the bookstore was transformed. Rows of chairs faced the small podium, while soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere. Regular customers began to arrive, greeting me with friendly familiarity. At precisely 6:45, Janet and David took their seats in the front row, leaving 3 empty chairs beside them. At 6:58, the bell above the door chimed. My family had arrived. Scene 3, the poetry reading. The poetry reading at second chapter was a monthly tradition, drawing literature enthusiasts from across town. Tonight, however, the usual warmth of the gathering was undercut by an electric tension that seemed to emanate from the 3 newcomers seated awkwardly in the front row. My parents and sister looked painfully out of place among my regular customers. Robert, once an imposing figure in academic circles, seemed diminished in his worn tweed jacket. Elizabeth, who had always prided herself on her appearance, wore a dated dress that had seen better days. And Catherine, usually so polished, had dark circles under her eyes poorly concealed by expensive makeup. I stepped up to the podium at exactly 7 o'clock, surveying the room with the practiced calm I developed over 15 years of facing unruly high school students. Welcome, everyone, to our September poetry reading, I began, my voice steady. Tonight's theme is reckoning, those moments when truth forces us to confront who we really are. My gaze lingered on my family for just a moment before moving on. I saw Catherine shift uncomfortably, while my father stared fixedly at the floor. I'll begin with Mary Oliver's The Journey, I announced, opening my well-worn anthology. As I read, I felt the words take flight, filling the room with their quiet power. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. My voice remained steady, but inside, each line resonated with my own journey away from the family that had failed me. I moved through my selections with deliberate care. Adrienne Rich on The Burning of Lies, Emily Dickinson on Success After Great Bitterness, and finally, Theodore Roth's My Papa's Waltz, a poem about complicated paternal relationships that I delivered while looking directly at my father. When I finished the final poem, the room was silent for a heartbeat before erupting into applause. I thanked everyone and announced a 15-minute intermission before the open mic portion would begin. My family and I have some private business to discuss, I added. We'll be using the garden room. Please help yourselves to refreshments. Without waiting to see if they would follow, I walked through the bookstore to the small glass enclosed garden room at the back, my favorite reading spot, where a single Japanese maple tree was just beginning to turn scarlet against the evening sky. Janet and David flanked me as my family filed in, looking like defendants approaching the bench. Really, Marion? Catherine gestured at my friends. You needed to bring back up? They're here as witnesses, I said calmly, pouring myself a glass of water. And moral support. Witnesses to what? Robert's voice was sharp with anxiety. To the truth. All of it. I pulled out the documents Janet had prepared. But first, let's be clear about why you're really here. The garden room fell silent except for the soft rustle of the maple leaves outside. You're here because Catherine's advertising career is imploding after her latest campaign was rejected, I began, watching my sister's face pale. You're here because Dad's drinking has accelerated since his forced retirement, and you're here because you've remortgaged your house 3 times to support Catherine's lifestyle and failed business ventures. How could you possibly know? Elizabeth started. I know many things, I interrupted, including that the foreclosure auction is next week, and unless you have $175,000, you'll lose the house where you raised your golden child while treating me like an afterthought. Marion, please, Elizabeth whispered, tears forming in her eyes. We're your family. Are we? I set down my water glass. Because family doesn't drain one child's education fund to benefit another. Family doesn't dismiss one child's achievements while celebrating another's mediocrity. Family doesn't. Oh, here we go again, Catherine interrupted. Poor Marion, always the victim. David's hand tightened on his notebook. Careful, he warned. No, let her talk, I said. Tell us, Catherine. Tell us how much money you've borrowed from mom and dad in the last 5 years. She paled. That's none of your business. Wrong. It became my business when they showed up at my door asking for help. I pulled out my phone. Should I read the numbers? Because I have them all. Every last penny. How dare you? Catherine's voice rose. $50,000 for your down payment. $30,000 for your divorce attorney. $125,000 for your counterfeit luxury goods business that failed spectacularly. And let's not forget the credit cards you opened in mom's name. Elizabeth gasped. Robert's face went red, then drained of all color. Catherine, he whispered, tell me that's not true. They offered to help. Catherine's voice rose hysterically. They wanted to. They always wanted to help me. I pulled out another document. This is a copy of my college fund statement from 2005, the day before you emptied it for Catherine's business school tuition. It had $87.32 in it. My money. Money Grandma left specifically for my education. We thought, Elizabeth started. You thought Catherine deserved it more. You always thought Catherine deserved more. I spread the papers across the table. Well, now it's my turn to decide who deserves what. What are these? Robert picked up the first page, squinting without his reading glasses. My conditions. There are 10 of them. Sign them all, and I'll help save your house. Refuse, and you can figure it out yourselves. I smiled thinly. You know, like I had to. Catherine snatched the papers, her face transitioning from pale to red as she read. This is insane. A public apology? Family therapy? Community service? She threw the papers down. She's trying to humiliate us. No, Janet spoke up, her lawyer's voice precise and measured. She's trying to make you understand what you did to her. We did what we thought was best, Robert insisted, his professor's authority returning briefly. Best for whom? David asked quietly. Because from where I'm sitting, your best choices destroyed one daughter while enabling the other to commit fraud. The word fraud fell like a bomb on the table. Catherine stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. You can't prove anything. Actually, I pulled out one final document. I can. Mom, is this your signature on Catherine's last loan application? Elizabeth's hands shook as she examined the paper. No, she whispered. No, I never signed this. Catherine's designer bag hit the floor. Her face crumpled. I needed the money, she sobbed. The divorce. Alex was going to take everything. Sign the papers, I said firmly. Or I'll make sure the bank sees this. Your choice. Robert reached for his pen first, hand trembling slightly. Elizabeth followed, tears streaming down her face. Catherine just stood there, shaking. Tick-tock, I said softly. The clock's running out, just like it did for me 15 years ago. The pen scratched against paper, one signature after another. When they finished, I gathered the documents carefully. The poetry reading will be ending soon, I announced. I suggest you leave through the back door. I'll be in touch about next steps. I stood up, then paused. Oh, and Catherine, don't bother trying to leave town. That would void the agreement immediately. As they filed out into the gathering darkness, Janet squeezed my hand. You okay? I took a deep breath of the cool autumn air, fragrant with the scent of fallen leaves and possibility. I'm just getting started. Scene 4, The Revelation. 3 days after the poetry reading, I sat in my apartment above the bookstore with David, reviewing what we'd started calling the reckoning plan. Your parents called again, he said, scrolling through his phone. That's 5 times today. Let them wait, I replied, checking the antique wall clock. They'll be here in an hour anyway. The doorbell chimed unexpectedly early. When I opened it, Catherine stood alone on my doorstep, looking decidedly less polished than usual. She wore a simple sweater and jeans instead of her usual designer outfit, and her face was bare of makeup. We need to talk, she said, pushing past me into my apartment. Before Mom and Dad get here. By all means, come in, I muttered, closing the door. Catherine paced my living room, her boots clicking against the hardwood floor. The sound reminded me of our childhood home, where she'd practiced walking in our mother's heels while I curled up with books in the window seat. Look, I know I messed up, she began, but there has to be another way. Another way? I crossed my arms. Like what? More loans? More fraud? I can pay it back. She ran her hands through her hair, a gesture so uncharacteristic that I almost didn't recognize her. I just need time. David laughed softly from his seat at my dining table. Like the time Marion needed to finish graduate school without going into debt? Catherine spun toward him. This isn't about you. You're right, I said quietly. It's about accountability, something you've never had to face. The doorbell rang again. This time, it was my parents, right on schedule. Elizabeth's eyes were red-rimmed, and Robert looked like he hadn't slept in days. Sit down. I gestured to the sofa. We have a lot to discuss. Before we start, Robert cleared his throat, the academic in him attempting to take control of the situation. We want you to know we've been thinking about everything you said. Really? I pulled out a folder. Then let's test that. Mom, do you remember what you said when I called you crying about not being able to afford my literature text for Professor Adamson's seminar? Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. Marion, that was so long ago. You said maybe I should have studied harder for scholarships like my sister. I was working 30 hours a week and maintaining a 3.8 GPA. I didn't mean, Dad, what about when I got that teaching position at Riverside High, the job that eventually led to my career in this bookstore? What did you say? Robert looked at the floor. I don't recall. You said it was cute that I was playing with poetry while Catherine was doing real work in advertising. I opened the folder. I kept every email, every text, every dismissive comment. Want to read them? This is ridiculous, Catherine snapped. We get it. You're bitter. David stood up. Your sister built herself from nothing while you were stealing from your own parents, and you have the audacity to call her bitter? I didn't steal. Show them. I cut in. Show them your bank statements from the last 5 years. Show them where the money went. Catherine's face crumpled. I can't. Because you spent it all on designer clothes, luxury vacations, and that sports car you totaled after driving it for just 3 months. Stop it. Elizabeth cried. Please, just tell us what you want. I pulled out the first document. Condition 1. You will write a detailed account of everything you did, every penny you took from my college fund, every opportunity you gave Catherine while denying me, every time you chose her over me. You will email this to our entire extended family. That's humiliating, Robert protested. Yes, I agreed. It is. Condition 2. Catherine will confess to the loan fraud in writing. I'll keep it as insurance. Catherine started to object, but I held up my hand. Condition 3. You will all attend family therapy together for at least 6 months. And if we do all this, Elizabeth whispered, you'll help save the house? No, I smiled. If you do all this, I'll consider letting you rent the house from me. The room went silent. What do you mean, rent from you? Robert's voice shook. I pulled out the paperwork. At the foreclosure auction last week. As of yesterday, I own the house where you raised your perfect daughter. Ironic, isn't it? Catherine launched herself off the couch. You evil bee. David stepped between us. Careful. Assault would void the agreement immediately. Why are you doing this? Elizabeth sobbed. We're your family. Family? I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Family doesn't make their child work in a dangerous motel until 3 a.m. to afford basic necessities. Family doesn't mock their child's passion for literature while funding another's shopping addiction. Family doesn't destroy one child's future to prop up another's facade. I stood up, gathering my documents. You have 24 hours to decide. Sign the papers, follow my conditions, and you can stay in the house as my tenants. Refuse, and you can all figure out where to live next week. You wouldn't, Catherine whispered. Try me. I walked to the door and opened it. Oh, and Catherine, I've already spoken to Alex. He's very interested in testifying about your financial activities during the divorce, just in case you're thinking of running. They filed out silently, broken. As I closed the door, David put his hand on my shoulder. You okay? I took a deep breath. I've never been better. That night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out my old copy of Jane Eyre, turning to the passage that had sustained me through college. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. For years, I'd imagined this moment, the moment when I would finally hold power over those who had hurt me. But now that it had arrived, I felt strangely hollow, as though the victory was less sweet than I'd anticipated. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Alex, Catherine's ex-husband. Just got a threatening call from Catherine. Thought you should know. I forwarded the message to David, who called immediately. Want me to send the evidence to the bank now? He asked. Not yet. Let's see what they do next. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly noon the next day, Catherine stormed into my bookstore during the busy lunch hour rush, bypassing my assistant somehow. Her mascara was smeared, and she clutched a crumpled stack of papers. You talked to Alex, she hissed. My ex-husband. I didn't look up from the inventory list I was reviewing. You should have knocked. We're in the middle of a sale. He's going to tell them everything, the credit cards, the gambling, the offshore account. I finished, finally meeting her eyes. Yes, he mentioned that. She collapsed into the chair across from my desk. How did you find out about everything? I'm good at what I do, Catherine. Really good. Something you and Dad never bothered to notice. I closed my laptop. Did you bring the signed papers? She threw them on my desk. Mom and Dad signed. I won't. Then I guess you better start packing. You don't understand. She leaned forward, desperate. I'll lose everything, my reputation, my friends. Like I lost my chance at a normal graduate school experience? I stood up. My assistant is on her way with security. You can either sign now or explain to them why you're trespassing. The door opened and two of my regular customers, both off-duty police officers who attended my mystery book club, appeared. Catherine's hand shook as she grabbed a pen. I hate you, she whispered, signing each page. No, I replied calmly. You hate that you're finally facing consequences. After she left, Janet came by with lunch. Your sister just ran past me crying. Good meeting. She signed. I showed her the papers. They all did. So what's next? Janet asked. Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Elizabeth. We need to meet, she said, her voice thin and wavering. We need to meet, she said, her voice thin and wavering. All of us. One last time. Scene 5, the letter. We gathered in my bookstore after closing that evening. The autumn rain had returned, drumming against the windows and casting watery shadows across the room. I'd chosen this setting deliberately, my territory, surrounded by the literature that had saved me when my family wouldn't. Robert and Elizabeth sat stiffly on the antique settee I'd rescued from a garage sale and restored myself. Catherine huddled in an armchair, looking uncharacteristically small. Janet and David flanked me like literary sentinels. We've signed everything, Robert said, his professor's voice now permanently diluted by defeat. What more do you want? Honesty, I replied, pulling out an old letter, the letter that had defined my existence for decades. Like about this. Mom, want to read it out loud? Elizabeth's face went white. Where did you get that? Found it in Catherine's room while helping her pack for college, the one you paid for. I unfolded the yellowed paper. Should I read it instead? Marian, please, dearest Catherine, I began, the words as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I know you're worried about your sister's attitude lately, but remember she was our backup plan. We only had her because the doctor said you might not be able to have children. You're a real miracle. The room went deadly quiet, the only sound the persistent tapping of rain against glass. I was 13 when I found this, I continued, each word measured and precise. 13 when I learned I was just an insurance policy. It wasn't like that, Elizabeth sobbed, her hands trembling. Really? Because that explains a lot. Why you always chose her, why my accomplishments never mattered, why you could steal my future without a second thought. We made mistakes. Robert started, his academics habit of intellectualizing emotions surfacing even now. Janet cut in, her liar's voice firm but controlled. You emotionally abused your daughter for years. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices. I pulled out one final document. This is the rental agreement for the house. $3,000 a month, utilities not included. Take it or leave it. That's more than our mortgage was, Catherine protested. Market rate, I shrugged. Plus a small fee for emotional damages. You can't be serious. Robert stood up, a shadow of his former authority flaring briefly. We're your parents. No, I said quietly. You're my tenants. And you're late with your first payment. Catherine lunged toward me, but David stepped between us. Remember the assault clause, he warned. You have until Friday to pay. I continued as if nothing had happened. And Catherine, the guest house is not included in the lease. Find your own place. Where am I supposed to go? She cried. You'll figure it out. I echoed their words from years ago. Now get out, all of you. They filed out one by one, Elizabeth crying, Robert silent, Catherine shaking with rage. As the door closed behind them, Janet hugged me. You did it, she whispered. Not yet. I looked at the stack of papers on my desk. This is just the beginning. What do you mean? David asked. I picked up my phone, showing them an email from Alex. Turns out Catherine's been hiding more than just credit card debt. And tomorrow, everyone's going to know exactly what kind of person she really is. Marion, David warned, be careful. Revenge can consume you. This isn't revenge, I said, typing a response to Alex. This is justice. And it's long overdue. The email from Alex contained exactly what I needed. Bank statements, hidden accounts, and a trail of financial destruction that would destroy Catherine's carefully crafted image. But before I could use it, my doorbell chimed at midnight. Through the peephole, I saw Catherine, her face streaked with mascara. For a moment, I considered ignoring her. I had every right to. Instead, I opened the door. You won, she slurred, clearly having had several drinks. Happy now? I should have closed the door. Instead, I let her in. You're drunk, I stated flatly. Call a car. Did you know? She stumbled to my couch, collapsing onto it without invitation. That dad always said you were the smart one? Marion's so responsible, he'd say. Marion never needs help, she laughed bitterly. That's why they helped me instead, because you could handle everything yourself. That's not help, Catherine. That's neglect. Oh, please. She stood up, swaying slightly. You got everything you wanted anyway. Look at this place. Look at your perfect life. I got nothing from them. Everything I have, I earned, I snapped, my carefully maintained composure finally cracking. While you were partying at Harvard on my college fund, I was working midnight shifts at that disgusting motel. While you were charging designer clothes to mom's credit cards, I was eating ramen and selling my textbooks to pay rent. At least you're strong. She screamed, the words echoing in the quiet bookstore. They made me weak. They gave me everything, and now I can't survive without them. The truth of her words hung in the air between us, unexpected and raw. That's not my fault, I said quietly. No, she stepped closer. Then why are you punishing me along with them? Because you knew. I met her eyes. You knew that money was meant for my education. You knew every time you asked them for more, they'd give it to you. You knew what you were taking from me, and you didn't care. I was their miracle baby, she whispered, the words slurring slightly. Their perfect daughter. And now I'm neither. I pulled out my phone. Alex sent me everything, Catherine. The gambling debts, the secret credit cards, the money you stole from his company before the divorce. She lunged for my phone. I stepped back and she stumbled, catching herself on a bookshelf, sending several volumes tumbling to the floor. You can't tell them, she begged. Please. They'll never forgive me. Like they never forgave me for not being you. I'll do anything. She was crying now, makeup running down her face. I'll get help. I'll pay everyone back. With what money? The trust fund you burned through? The savings you stole from mom and dad? She slapped me hard, the sound echoing through the room. I didn't flinch. Feel better? I asked, touching my stinging cheek. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She accused, holding her hand. You love watching us suffer. No, I replied, looking at the fallen books. My first editions of Austen and Bront now sprawled on the floor like wounded soldiers. I'm just done protecting you. All of you. What do you want from me? She whispered, suddenly seeming much younger, almost like the little girl I remembered watching from my window seat as she played on the swing set, our parents applauding her every move. I want you to feel what I felt, I said softly. That moment when you realize no one's coming to save you. That horrible, crushing loneliness of knowing your family chose someone else. They didn't choose me, she said, sinking down onto the floor beside the fallen books. They trapped me. Every gift came with expectations. Every investment was another chain. She looked up at me, her mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. Do you know what Dad said when I wanted to study art instead of business? Catherine, darling, we didn't spend all this money for you to waste your potential. For a moment, just a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The difference is, you had a choice, I said, kneeling to gather my precious books. You could have said no. You could have stood up for me. Instead, you took everything they offered and asked for more. She sank back onto the couch, defeated. So what happens now? I sat across from her, cradling Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice in my lap, a first edition I'd found at an estate sale and saved for months to purchase. Now you have two options. 1. I send everything Alex gave me to the police, the banks, and our entire family. You face fraud charges, possible jail time, and complete social destruction. Or option 2, you tell the truth. All of it. You write down every manipulation, every lie, every dollar you stole. You admit what you did to me, to mom and dad, to Alex. You get professional help for your spending addiction. And you do it all publicly. That would ruin me, she whispered. No, I corrected her, running my finger along the spine of my book. That would free you. She stared at me for a long moment. You really think I can change? I think you have to. Because this, I gestured around me. This is your rock bottom. The only way out is through the truth. Catherine stood up, steadier now. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow at noon. After that, I send everything to everyone. At the door, she turned back. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for tonight, but for everything. I know, I said. But sorry doesn't pay back 15 years of debt. After she left, I called David. She came by, I told him. Drunk, angry, then apologetic. And tomorrow we'll see if she's really sorry, or just sorry she got caught. Be careful, he warned again. Family secrets are dangerous things. So am I replied, touching my cheek where she'd slapped me. So am I. Scene 6, The Truth, at 11:59 a.m. The next day, my inbox pinged. Catherine's email arrived with seconds to spare, containing a document titled simply The Truth. Before I could open it, another email came from Elizabeth. We need to talk. All of us. One last time. I forwarded both emails to David and Janet, then replied to Elizabeth. My bookstore, 7 p.m. This time, when they arrived, something was different. Catherine came alone, wearing jeans and a plain sweater instead of her usual designer outfit. Robert and Elizabeth looked like they'd aged another decade since yesterday. Before you say anything, Catherine spoke first, her voice steadier than I'd heard it in years. I want them to hear it from me. She pulled out a stack of papers and began reading. My first theft was at 16. I stole Mom's credit card to buy a prom dress. When she found out, she paid the bill and told me not to worry about it. That was the beginning. Elizabeth started to speak, but Catherine held up her hand. Please, let me finish. She took a deep breath. By college, I was spending thousands monthly on clothes, parties, and drugs. When Marion's college fund disappeared into my business school tuition, I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself I deserved it. Catherine, stop, Robert pleaded, the color draining from his face. No, Dad. They need to know what their perfect daughter really did. She turned a page. I forged Mom's signature on loans. I emptied joint accounts. I stole from Alex's company before the divorce. The total amount, she swallowed hard, is just over $800,000. The room went completely silent, the only sound the ticking of the antique clock on my bookstore wall. $800,000? Elizabeth whispered, swaying slightly. That's not counting Marion's college fund, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger with each confession, or the money I borrowed directly from you. Altogether, I've destroyed over $1 million of this family's money. Robert sat down heavily on a nearby chair. Why? Because I could, Catherine's voice cracked. Because you taught me that money equals love, and I needed so much love. I stayed quiet, watching them unravel under the weight of truth. I've sent copies of my confession to the bank, Catherine said, and to Alex. I'm meeting with the police tomorrow to turn myself in. No, Elizabeth cried. We can fix this. That's the problem, Mom. I finally spoke. You've been fixing things for Catherine her whole life. Look where that got us. Marion didn't make me do this, Catherine added quickly. She gave me a choice. I chose the truth. The truth? Robert laughed bitterly. The truth is we failed both of you in different ways. No, I corrected him. You failed Catherine by never setting boundaries. You failed me by setting nothing but boundaries. David, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. The rental agreement needs to be finalized tonight. And there's one more condition. I pulled out a new document. Family therapy. All of us. Once a week. After everything, you still want, Elizabeth trailed off, her voice breaking. I want you to understand what you did. Really understand, not just the money, but the damage. I handed them each a copy. Sign, and you can stay in the house. Don't sign, and you'll need to be out by Friday. Catherine spoke up again. I won't be staying. I found a small apartment, and after I deal with the legal issues, she paused. I'm checking into rehab for shopping addiction and substance abuse. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of respect for my sister. Good, I said simply. Robert signed first, then Elizabeth. As they stood to leave, Catherine handed me one last paper. What's this? I asked. A letter I should have written years ago. Don't read it until I'm gone. After they left, Janet hugged me tight. You okay? I don't know, I admitted. It feels unfinished. Real? David suggested. For the first time in my life, everything feels real, I corrected him. I opened Catherine's letter, reading it aloud. Dear Marion, you were right about everything, but you were wrong about one thing. I wasn't their perfect daughter. I was their perfect puppet. You were the strong one, the real one, the one I wished I could be. I'm sorry for every dollar I took, every opportunity I stole, every time I stayed silent when they hurt you. I'm sorry I needed to lose everything to finally tell the truth. Don't forgive me, I haven't earned that. Just know that your little sister finally grew up thanks to you. Catherine. David took the letter gently from my hands. What now? I looked around my beautiful bookstore, bought with my own money, filled with the literature that had sustained me when my family wouldn't. Now we see if they can handle the truth as well as they handled the lies. And Catherine? Janet asked. Catherine made her choice, I said, picking up the therapy schedule. Now she has to live with it, just like I had to live with theirs. Scene 7 Healing Pages. The first family therapy session was exactly as awkward as I expected. Dr. Martinez, a calm, no-nonsense woman with silver-streaked hair, sat in her sunlit office while we arranged ourselves like opposing armies, me on one couch, my parents on another, with Catherine's empty seat between us like a ghost. Catherine couldn't be here today, Elizabeth began, twisting a tissue in her hands. Because she's in court today, I finished. I know, Alex kept me updated. Did you have to encourage her to turn herself in? Robert's voice was tight with anger. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Robert, is that what you're most upset about? Catherine facing consequences? I'm upset that Marion used this situation to destroy our family, he retorted, the academic in him still struggling to maintain control of a narrative that had long since slipped from his grasp. Your family was already destroyed, I said quietly. I just made you look at the wreckage. Perhaps, Dr. Martinez suggested, we should start with how we got here. Elizabeth pulled out a tissue. We thought we were doing our best. Really? I couldn't help myself. Your best was telling me I didn't deserve to pursue graduate studies? Your best was watching me work dangerous jobs while funding Catherine's shopping addiction? We didn't know about the addiction, Robert protested. But you knew about my suffering. You just didn't care. Dr. Martinez held up her hand. Marion, tell them directly how that made you feel. I turned to face my parents fully. It made me feel worthless. Like I was a backup plan that didn't work out. Elizabeth flinched. That letter. I never meant for you to see it. But you meant what you wrote. The silence was deafening. Yes, she finally whispered. At the time, I did. Robert started to speak, but his phone buzzed. His face went pale as he read the message. Catherine got 6 months, he said, plus probation and mandatory rehabilitation. Good, I said firmly. She needs it. How can you be so cold? Elizabeth cried. Dr. Martinez intervened. Is it cold to want accountability, or is it healthy? I don't understand. Robert shook his head. How did we end up here? Let me help you understand. I pulled out my old diary. This is from the night I found Mom's letter. I was 13. I opened to a marked page and read, Dear Diary, today I learned I'm nobody's miracle. Mom and Dad only had me because they were afraid Catherine would die. Everything makes sense now. Why they love her more. Why nothing I do is good enough. I'm just the backup that wasn't needed. Elizabeth was sobbing now. Robert looked like he'd been punched. Marion, Dr. Martinez said gently, what do you want from your parents now? I want them to feel what I felt, that moment of realizing you're not enough, that your own parents see you as plan B. We see you now, Robert said quietly. No, I corrected him. You see my success, my bookstore, my power over you. You still don't see me. Then help us see, Elizabeth pleaded. I stood up and walked to the window, where autumn leaves were starting to collect on the sidewalk below. You want to see me? Fine. Come to my bookstore tomorrow. Not as customers, but as observers. Watch me work. Meet my community. Learn what your backup daughter actually does. You'd let us do that? Robert asked, surprised momentarily overcoming his defensive posture. One day. One chance to see the person you could have been proud of all along. Dr. Martinez made a note. That's an excellent suggestion. Homework for next week. Robert and Elizabeth will spend one day observing Marion at her bookstore. Marion, you'll visit Catherine in rehab. What? I spun around. That wasn't part of the deal. Healing goes both ways, she said simply. You've shown them your pain. Now show them your strength. And maybe show Catherine there's a path forward. As we left the session, Elizabeth tried to hug me. I stepped back. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. That night, I called Janet. They're coming to the bookstore tomorrow, I told her. Want to accidentally spill coffee on them? I laughed, then stopped suddenly as tears started flowing unexpectedly. Marion? Janet's voice softened. What's wrong? I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. Let them in again. See Catherine. Keep pushing for whatever this is. It's called healing, babe. And you're already doing it. Am I though? Or am I just finding new ways to punish them? Why can't it be both? She asked. You're making them face what they did while giving them a chance to do better. That's not punishment. That's growth. I wiped my eyes, looking at a family photo I'd kept hidden in my desk drawer. We were all smiling, but only Catherine's smile reached her eyes. Mine was the careful smile of a child who had already learned to hide her pain. Tomorrow my parents will see the real me, I whispered, putting the photo away. And soon I'll have to face the real Catherine. One day at a time. One truth at a time, Janet corrected. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Tomorrow would be another battle, but for the first time, it felt like a battle worth fighting. Scene 8 second chapters. The rehabilitation center's garden was awash in autumn colors, maples flaming red, oaks burnished gold. I sat across from Catherine at a small stone table, the chilly October air carrying the scent of wood smoke from somewhere nearby. Catherine looked different, healthier, but also smaller somehow without her designer armor. She wore a simple gray sweatshirt with the center's logo, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, revealing a face I hadn't truly seen in years. You actually came, she said, fidgeting with her paper cup of coffee. Dr. Martinez insisted. I paused, then added more honestly. And maybe she was right. Mom and Dad told me about visiting your bookstore. Dad couldn't stop talking about your poetry collection and the reading group you run for at-risk teens. Yeah, well, I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise, even secondhand. Turns out their backup plan did okay. Marion, Catherine set down her cup, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. I saw the college fund paperwork during financial disclosure, the exact amount I took from you. I've been calculating how much it would be worth now with interest. Why? Because I'm going to pay you back every penny. It'll take years, but keep it, I interrupted. Use it for therapy or rehab or whatever you need to stay clean. She stared at me. I don't deserve your kindness. This isn't kindness, I said, watching a maple leaf spiral down between us. It's investment in change. Don't waste it. Later, as I was leaving, Catherine handed me a sketchbook. What's this? I asked. Open it when you get home, she said. It's part of my therapy assignment. That evening, sitting in my apartment above the bookstore, I finally opened the sketchbook. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, dating back to Catherine's college years. They were good, surprisingly good, revealing a talent I'd never known she possessed. Most were of everyday scenes, a coffee shop, a park bench, a sleeping cat. But in the middle of the book was a sketch that made my breath catch. It was me, at 17, sitting in our childhood home's window seat, totally absorbed in a book. The detail was incredible, the way my hair fell across my face, the slight furrow in my brow as I concentrated, the worn spines of the books piled beside me. Beneath the drawing, Catherine had written, "The reader, the only time I ever envied her." I was still staring at the sketch when a knock came at my door. My parents were waiting on the front steps of the bookstore. They'd been living in the guest house of their former home, now my property, for 3 weeks, following my rules, attending therapy, doing the work. How is she? Elizabeth asked as I approached. Better. Different. I unlocked the front door. Come in. We need to talk. They followed me inside, taking their usual spots on the couch, but something had shifted in the air between us. I've been thinking, Robert began, his voice lacking its usual academic certainty, about what Dr. Martinez said about generational trauma, how my father treated me the same way I treated you. The difference is you had a choice, I said. Yes. He looked me in the eye. And I chose wrong. We both did. Elizabeth pulled out an envelope. We've been working on this for weeks. It's not enough, but inside was a letter, handwritten, addressed to the entire extended family. We're sending copies to everyone, she explained, her voice trembling. Confessing everything, how we hurt you, how we enabled Catherine, how we failed as parents. It's time for the whole family to know the truth. No more pretending, Robert added. I read the letter slowly. Every painful detail was there. The college fund theft, the emotional abuse, the years of favoritism. But something else too. Genuine remorse. There's more, Elizabeth said quietly. We're selling our antique store. What? I looked up sharply. But that's your life's work. No, Robert corrected. It was our excuse. Working endless hours instead of facing our failures as parents. The money from the sale, Elizabeth continued, will be split equally between you and Catherine. Not because you need it now, but because it's what we should have done all along. I don't want your money. We know, Robert said. That's why we're also donating half to a scholarship fund for students whose parents can't or won't help them. I sat back, studying their faces. The pride was gone, replaced by something more real, more human. You know this doesn't fix everything, I said finally. Nothing can fix the past, Elizabeth agreed. But maybe we can build something new. Something honest. My phone buzzed, a text from Catherine. Thank you for coming today. For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to be perfect, just trying to be better. I showed them the message. Both our daughters, Robert said softly, turned out stronger than we ever imagined. No thanks to you. I couldn't help but add. No, he agreed. But maybe thanks to all of this, the fall, the fight, the truth. I walked them to the door, but before they left for the guest house, I said something I never thought I would. Sunday dinner. Here. Catherine will be out of rehab for the weekend. Really? Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. One dinner. No promises after that. And I'm cooking. No more of your fancy catering. We'll be here, Robert said. Just us. No pretenses. After they left, I called David. They're trying, I told him. Really trying. And you? I'm trying too. Not to forgive, not yet, but to build something new from the ashes of what they burned. That's called healing, he said. No, I corrected him. That's called winning, not by destroying them, but by forcing them to grow, to change, to face themselves. I looked at Catherine's sketch again, then at the family letter, then around my beautiful bookstore built from my own strength and determination. They said Catherine was the better investment, I murmured. But I invested in myself, and that's the return they never saw coming. Epilogue of Winter's First Snow. The first snow of winter was falling softly outside the windows of second chapter as I welcomed guests to our December poetry reading. The bookstore was warm with golden light and the scent of cinnamon from the mulled cider I'd prepared. Holiday decorations, subtle and literary themed, adorned the shelves. 6 weeks had passed since that first family therapy session. 6 weeks of painful truths, unexpected revelations, and small, tentative steps towards something I wasn't yet ready to call reconciliation. Catherine had completed her rehabilitation program and was working part-time at a local art supply store while attending community college classes in graphic design. Her court-mandated community service hours were being fulfilled by teaching art to children at the homeless shelter where I ran a weekly reading program. My parents had settled into a routine as my tenants, gradually downsizing their possessions as they prepared for a more modest life. Robert was volunteering at the university library, cataloging rare books, finding, perhaps, a new appreciation for the literature he had once dismissed as my frivolous passion. Elizabeth had joined a support group for parents estranged from their children and was learning, slowly, to express her emotions without medication. I stepped up to the podium as the last guests found their seats. Welcome to our December poetry reading, I began. Tonight's theme is rebirth, finding new beginnings in unlikely places. I opened my anthology to Emily Dickinson, Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. As I read, I noticed movement at the back of the store. Catherine slipped in quietly, followed by our parents. They hadn't told me they were coming. When I finished the scheduled readings, I surprised myself by adding, I'd like to close with a poem I wrote this week. I pulled out a sheet of paper, my hands only slightly trembling. Second chapters begin not with forgetting, but with remembering differently. The spine cracks open to fresh pages waiting for new ink. This is how we rebuild, not from nothing, but from everything that came before. After the applause, as guests mingled and browsed, Catherine approached my podium, our parents hanging back uncertainly. That was beautiful, she said, handing me a small wrapped package. Early Christmas present. Inside was a framed sketch, my bookstore, filled with people, light streaming through the windows. In the foreground was me, reading to a circle of children. The detail was exquisite, from the titles on the book spines to the expression of rapt attention on the children's faces. You kept drawing, I said, genuinely impressed. It's the only thing that was ever really mine, she replied. Not something they pushed me into. Not something to impress anyone. Just mine. I looked past her to where our parents stood awkwardly by the door, neither fully in nor out of my space. Stay for coffee? I asked, the invitation extended to all of them. I close in 20 minutes. We don't want to impose, Robert said. It's not an imposition if it's an invitation, I replied. As we sat around my small table upstairs later that evening, the conversation was still stilted, careful. We were strangers finding our way towards something undefined. But when Elizabeth admired a first edition of Little Women on my shelf, I found myself telling her how I'd found it at an estate sale and restored the binding myself. When Robert mentioned a lecture series at the university on women poets, I actually considered attending. None of us mentioned forgiveness. It was too soon, the wound still too fresh. But as the snow continued to fall outside, I realized that second chapter wasn't just the name of my bookstore, it was the story we were all tentatively beginning to write. The Harrisons would never be a Hallmark card family. Too much had happened, too many years lost. But perhaps we could be something else, something built on truth instead of expectations, on acceptance instead of demands. Catherine helped me wash the coffee cups before they left, the two of us moving around my small kitchen in a dance that felt both foreign and vaguely familiar. Same time next week? She asked as they prepared to leave, her voice casual but her eyes watchful. Same time, I agreed. Bring your sketchbook. I know some publishers who might be interested in your work. After they left, I sat alone in my bookstore, surrounded by the stories that had saved me when my family wouldn't. I picked up Catherine's sketch again, studying the light and shadow she'd captured so perfectly. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the street in a blank white canvas. Second chances, I thought, don't erase what came before, they simply offer a fresh page on which to continue the story. And for the first time in decades, I was curious to see what the next chapter might hold.